A desolate bus stop under a flickering neon sign. The rain is so heavy it sounds like white noise. Jully is wearing her graduation gown over her work clothes, having come straight from a ceremony her father never showed up for. Her father is there, but he's shaking. He isn't holding a gift, he's holding her passport. A sleek, matte black car pulls up, splashing grey water over Jully's hem. "Jully, I did it, Dad. I graduated. We can go home now, right?" Father, sobbing, avoiding her eyes. "The house is gone, Jully. Everything is gone. He said he'd clear it if I gave him the one thing I had left that was valuable." The back door opens. Do-hyeon steps out, his umbrella held by a silent guard. He looks at Jully, not her gown, but the exhaustion etched into her face. He takes the passport from her father's trembling hand. "Do-hyeon, you don't belong to a deadbeat anymore. You belong to a debt, get in." Jully doesn't fight. She simply looks at her father with a look of such profound, forgiving heartbreak that Do-hyeon feels a strange, sharp pang in his chest for the first time in years. This is Afro-K Hearts and Heists, the home of Afro-Korean mafia romance, where desire is deadly and love never comes easy. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of passion and power. Let the story unfold. The mountaintop estate was a fortress of glass and slate, perched so high above Seoul that the city's vibrant pulse was reduced to a distant, flickering memory. As the gates hissed shut behind the sedan, Jully clutched her graduation gown to her chest, the polyester fabric still damp from the rain. Inside, the house was a cathedral of silence. There were no clattering dishes, no shouting neighbors, and no hum of the subway. Just a vast, sterile emptiness that felt far more suffocating than the cramped basement apartment she had shared with her father's ghosts. Do-hyeon stepped out of the car, his movements fluid and precise. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He knew she had nowhere else to go. He led her through a foyer that smelled of expensive cedar and cold rain, stopping finally in a living room that overlooked the abyss. "Where is the kitchen?" Jully asked, her voice cracking the silence. "Or the laundry? If I'm to pay off what he owes, I should start." Do-hyeon turned, the moonlight catching the sharp line of his jaw. He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, not the look of a man checking his property, but of a man observing a miracle he didn't quite believe in. "You aren't here to scrub floors, Jully," he said, his voice a low, melodic vibration. "I have people for that. Your job is much simpler. You will eat when I eat, you will sit where I sit, you will exist within my sight at all times." Jully's brow furrowed. "That's not work, that's a cage." "It's a contract," he corrected, stepping closer until she could smell the faint, spicy scent of his cologne. "My world is full of people who want something from me. You are the only thing in this house that doesn't have a price tag I can understand. You will be my shadow. Your presence is the only thing that makes this tomb feel like a home." He reached out, his gloved fingers hovering just inches from her cheek before he pulled back as if burned. Jully didn't flinch. Even now, knowing this man had essentially purchased her future, she couldn't find the anger to curse him. She saw the way his eyes darted to the dark corners of the room, the hypervigilance of a man who owned everything but trusted nothing. "You're lonely," she whispered, the realization hitting her with a wave of profound pity. Do-hyeon's expression hardened into a mask of ice. "I am protected, there is a difference." He signaled to a waiting maid. "Take her to the East Wing, get her out of that gown, it's a relic of a life that no longer exists." As Jully was led away, she looked back at him standing alone against the glass. He had the whole world at his feet, yet he looked like he was starving. She realized then that the silence of the estate wasn't peace, it was a scream he had been holding in for years. The silence of the mountain estate was often broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the study, but tonight, the quiet felt heavy, like a secret waiting to be unearthed. Do-hyeon moved through the East Wing with the predatory grace of a man who owned the air itself. He had intended to check the perimeter, but his feet led him toward the utility room, where the remnants of Jully's arrival had been discarded. There, sitting atop a bin of silk scraps, was her graduation cap. The mortarboard was bent, and the black fabric was stained with the salty grime of Seoul's rainwater. As he picked it up, a small gold tassel fell away, hitting the marble floor with a hollow metallic click. Tucked inside the lining was a damp parchment, a dean's list commendation from her university in America, detailing a master's thesis on international economic law that had been graded with highest honors. Do-hyeon's grip tightened on the ruined velvet. He thought of her father, a man who had traded this brilliant, soaring mind for a stack of gambling chips in a smoke-filled basement. Jully hadn't just lost her freedom. She had laid her entire future on the altar of a man who didn't even have the decency to watch her walk across a stage. He found her in the library, staring out at the fog-shrouded peaks. She looked small in the oversized silk robe the maids had given her, but her posture remained straight, unyielding in its dignity. "You were meant to be a doctor of law," Do-hyeon said, his voice cutting through the gloom like a cold blade. He held out the crushed cap. "You spent 6 years building a life, only to let a coward throw it into the mud for a hand of cards." Jully turned, her eyes reflecting the dim moonlight. She didn't look ashamed, nor did she look angry. She looked at the cap with a soft, distant longing that made Do-hyeon's chest ache with a sudden, violent possessiveness. "My father didn't throw it away," she whispered, her incapacity to hate casting a glow of heartbreaking kindness over her words. "He just got lost. He needed help, and I was the only thing he had left to give." "He stole your life, Jully," Do-hyeon hissed, stepping into her space until she was pressed against the cold glass. The clinical indifference he had cultivated for years was evaporating, replaced by a dark, protective obsession. "He doesn't deserve your mercy. From this moment on, you will not mention his name. You will not worry for his debts." He reached out, his bare thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a proprietary heat. "The world thinks I bought a debt. They are wrong. I have claimed a star that fell into the dirt, and I will burn anyone who tries to dim your light again, even the man who raised you." Jully looked into the eyes of the Mafia Boss and saw not a master, but a guardian who was beginning to lose his own mind to the thought of her. The Ice King was melting, and in his place was something far more dangerous, a man who would destroy the world to keep her safe. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, leading her out of the room he now owned, leaving the elite of the underworld to realize that the Ice King had finally found something he valued more than his throne. The sanctuary of the mountain estate was shattered by a single, frantic phone call that echoed through the marble halls like a death knell. Jully's father was gone, taken from a gambling den by a faction that didn't care about Do-hyeon's untouchable decree. They wanted the interest on a debt that was never truly settled, and they were using the only leverage left to pull Jully back into the mud. Jully found Do-hyeon in his private gym, his knuckles bloodied from a heavy bag that looked like it had taken the brunt of his restless energy. She didn't approach him with the fear of a captive. She approached him with the desperation of a daughter who still couldn't find it in her heart to abandon the man who had failed her. "They have him, Do-hyeon," she gasped, her voice thick with unshed tears. "They said if the money isn't there by dawn, they'll send him back in pieces. Please, you have the power, save him." Do-hyeon stopped his assault on the bag, his chest heaving under a thin layer of sweat. He turned to her, his eyes dark with a cold, simmering resentment. "Why, Jully? Why do you want to save a man who treated you like a currency? He is the reason you are trapped in this house. He is the reason your dreams are in a landfill." "Because he's my father," she cried, the words ripping from her throat. "I can't hate him just because he's broken. If I let him die, I lose the only piece of home I have left." Do-hyeon stepped toward her, his shadow looming large against the mirrored walls. He reached out, his thumb catching a stray tear on her cheek. "I will save him. I will burn that entire district to the ground to bring him back if that's what you wish, but I won't do it for a debt." He leaned down, his face inches from hers, his voice dropping to a lethal, intimate whisper. "The contract is done. I burned it the night of the auction. You are free to walk out of those gates right now and never look back. So if I do this, if I risk my men and my peace for that coward, you must tell me the truth." Jully's breath hitched as he gripped her waist, pulling her flush against the heat of his body. "Admit it, Jully," he rasped, his obsession finally breaking through the ice. "Tell me you aren't staying because you owe me. Tell me you're staying because you want to be here, because you want me." Jully looked into the eyes of the man who had become both her captor and her only shield. Her capacity for empathy saw the raw, terrified vulnerability beneath his demand. He didn't want her gratitude, he wanted her heart. "I'm still here, Do-hyeon," she whispered, her hand rising to rest over his racing heart. "Not for the money, not for the debt, I'm here because I don't want to be anywhere else." Do-hyeon let out a jagged breath, his forehead dropping to hers. The Ice King had his answer, and the city was about to learn exactly how far he would go for the woman who had finally chosen H. The following Sunday, a strange, expectant warmth settled over the mountain estate, contrasting the biting autumn wind. Jully had spent the morning in the library, her heart heavy with the quiet ache of longing that no amount of marble or silk could soothe. She missed the rhythmic clapping of hands, the smell of Sunday potluck, and the voices that had raised her when her father's gambling had left her home dark and silent. Do-hyeon entered the room, his usual charcoal suit replaced by a softer knit sweater, though his eyes remained as sharp as ever. He didn't say a word, he simply took her hand, a gesture that was now fluid and familiar, and led her toward the grand terrace. As the glass doors slid open, Jully's breath caught in her throat. Arranged in the center of the manicured courtyard was a group of 20 people, their faces glowing with a familiarity that felt like a dream. It was the choir from her home in Georgia, the aunties who had packed her lunches, the cousins she had grown up with, and the choir director who had taught her that even a whisper could be a song. The first note of a gospel hymn rose into the thin mountain air, rich and soulful, shattering the sterile silence of Do-hyeon's world. The harmony was a physical force, a blend of joy and resilience that bridged the thousands of miles between a small church in the south and the heights of Seoul. Jully let out a sob that was half laughter, her hands flying to her face as she looked at Do-hyeon. How did you even find them? I told you, Jully, he murmured, stepping behind her so his presence could be her anchor. He wasn't looking at the choir, he was watching the way her eyes lit up, his gaze tracing the first genuine, unburdened smile he had ever seen on her face. You are no longer a debt to be managed. You are a life I intend to honor. If your heart is in America, I will bring America to you. He had spent millions on private jets, visas, and logistics, navigating a labyrinth of red tape just to hear the sound of her laughter. To the underworld, he was still the ruthless kingpin, but here, in the shadow of the music, he was just a man counting the beats of her heart. He realized that his wealth had never felt like power until he used it to heal the wounds he hadn't inflicted. As the choir's voices reached a crescendo, singing of hope and home, Jully turned and buried her face in Do-hyeon's chest. She didn't see the Ice King or the Mafia Boss. She saw the man who had stopped looking for a return on his investment and started looking for a reason to stay soft. In the middle of his cold empire, a new kingdom was being built, one where the only currency that mattered was the light in her eyes. The fragile piece of the estate shattered for Jully not with a shout, but with the soft click of a misplaced file. While searching for a book in Do-hyeon's private study, she stumbled upon a crimson folder buried beneath a stack of land deeds. Inside was the original contract, the one that had turned her life into a transaction, but across the front, a bold, red stamp declared it settled in full. The date of the final payment was staggering. It had been paid off nearly 4 months ago, just weeks after she had first arrived at the mountain fortress. Jully felt the air leave her lungs. The threats from the debtors, the fear for her father's safety, the heavy weight of the debt she thought she was still paying off, it had all been a ghost. She had been free for months, yet she had been living as a captive in a house of secrets. The door creaked open and Do-hyeon stepped in. His silhouette framed by the amber glow of the hallway. He saw the folder in her hands, and for the first time the Ice King looked truly terrified. The mask of the ruthless boss cracked, revealing a man who had committed a desperate, selfish sin. You paid it, Jully whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and betrayal. You settled the debt before the choir came, before the gala, before everything. Why did you keep me here under a lie? Do-hyeon didn't move. His jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists at his sides. Because I knew the moment you realized you owed me nothing, you would walk out those gates and never look back. I knew that without the contract, I had no right to hold you. I was a coward, Jully. He stepped into the light, his eyes burning with a dark, suffocating honesty. I watched you start to smile, watched you turn this tomb into a home, and I became addicted to the version of myself that existed when you were near. I thought if I told you the truth, I'd return to the silence. I wasn't just keeping you prisoner, I was keeping myself from drowning. Jully looked at the man who had bought her freedom only to hide it from her. Her incapacity to hate struggled against the sting of the deception. She saw the raw, jagged hole in his soul, the fear of a man who believed he was only worth staying with if there was a price tag attached. You didn't trust me, she said, the heartbreak clear in her tone. You didn't trust that I might have stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to. Do-hyeon took a step toward her, his voice a broken plea. How could I? In my world, everything is a trade. I didn't know how to believe in a choice. In the heavy silence that followed, the power dynamic shifted forever. The debt was gone, but the emotional cost of the lie hung between them, a final wall that Do-hyeon had built with his own hands. The sirens wailing at the base of the mountain sounded like a funeral dirge for the Kang dynasty. Inside the estate, the air was sharp with the scent of ozone and betrayal. The coup had been surgical. Do-hyeon's own board, led by the vipers who had once bowed the lowest, had manufactured a trail of digital evidence linking him to a high-profile political assassination. The trap was perfect. To the authorities, he was the monster they had always suspected. To his rivals, he was finally a target. "They're at the gates," Do-hyeon said, his voice eerily calm as he watched the blue and red lights reflect off the glass. He turned to Jully, his eyes softened by a tragic final clarity. "They offered me a deal 10 minutes ago. If I hand you over as the true mastermind, if I claim you were the one who used your legal brilliant mind to orchestrate the movement of the funds, the evidence against me disappears. They want a scapegoat the public will hate more than a mafia boss. They want a foreigner to blame." Jully stepped toward him, her heart thundering against her ribs. "You can't be serious, you wouldn't." "No," Do-hyeon whispered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I wouldn't, but I'm not going to fight them, Jully, not the way they expect." He sat at the obsidian desk one last time and pulled out a series of documents, not contracts of debt, but deeds of total surrender. With a steady hand, he signed over every shell company, every offshore account, and every deed to his name directly to the National Prosecutor's Office. It was a scorched earth confession, a mountain of evidence that would dismantle his empire but prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Jully was an innocent bystander, a victim of his shadow, not a partner in his crimes. "By the time the sun rises, I will have nothing," he said, handing the files to a trusted courier. "The Kang Empire is gone. I've traded it all for a single guarantee, your total exoneration and a lifetime of protection from the state." "You're giving up everything," Jully whispered, her incapacity to hate turning into a devastating wave of grief. "Your legacy, your power, you'll go to prison for years." "I was already in a prison," Do-hyeon said, stepping into her space and cupping her face with his scarred hands. "Power was just the weight of the bars. This isn't a sacrifice, Jully, it's a purchase. I'm finally buying the only thing I ever truly wanted, your safety." As the heavy doors of the estate were kicked open by the tactical teams, Do-hyeon didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stood in front of Jully, a shield made of flesh and blood rather than marble and gold. As the handcuffs clicked shut over his wrists, he looked at her one last time, his eyes bright with a freedom that no cell could take away. The salt-heavy breeze of the East Sea carried none of the iron-cold tension of the Seoul skyline. In the sleepy coastal town of Sokcho, the mornings were marked by the rhythmic call of gulls and the gentle splashing of waves against the docks, rather than the sharp ring of encrypted phones and the heavy tread of tactical boots. 2 years had passed since the fall of the Kang Empire, a fall that had dominated the headlines for months. But here, the world only knew Lee Do-hyeon as the quiet man who helped maintain the local fishing fleet, and Jully as the woman whose laugh could brighten even the greyest morning at the village library. Do-hyeon adjusted his humble work jacket, his hands no longer smooth and manicured, but calloused and stained with the honest work of a life built from scratch. He walked toward the small, weathered cottage perched on the cliffside, where a single warm light burned in the window. He was no longer a boss, shadowed by vipers. He was a man who could finally walk the streets without looking over his shoulder, his only protection being the anonymity he had traded a fortune to secure. Jully met him at the door, her hair caught in a messy bun, a contrast to the silk gowns of her past. She had finished her studies, but she hadn't sought the cold corridors of high-stakes law. Instead, she used her brilliant mind to advocate for the local immigrant families, turning her chronic compassion into a beacon for the community. When she saw him, her face broke into that radiant, unburdened smile that Do-hyeon still counted as his only true wealth. "The neighbours left a basket of persimmons on the porch," she said, pulling him into the warmth of the kitchen. "They wanted to thank you for fixing the harangue's engine." Do-hyeon pulled her close, the scent of sea salt and home filling his senses. "I didn't do it for the fruit, Jully." "I know," she whispered, resting her head against his chest. "You did it because you're a good man, even if it took a war for you to believe it." There were no marble floors here, and no contracts stamped in red ink. Their life was simple, sustained by the small restaurant they ran together on the weekends and the peace they had cultivated in the ruins of an obsession. They had broken the rules of the underworld and the expectations of society, proving that even a star fallen into the dirt could find its way back to the sky. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the waves in shades of gold and violet, they stood together on the porch. The only contract left between them was the silent promise in their eyes, a vow of partnership, equality, and a love that required no collateral. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey from the shadows of betrayal to the light of a new beginning. If Jully and Do-hyeon's story touched your heart, make sure to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. What was your favorite Ice King moment? Let's talk about their redemption in the comments below.